Hey, Brandel. Right. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Oh, okay, very good. Hey, Tess.
Hi, Tess.
Hello.
So, hang on. I'm just testing things. Yeah, I'm connecting through my phone, which is a bit weird. They like to censor all kinds of things in China, but if it's on a personal mobile, most of the things work. So that's very, very weird. Hello, Peter.
Yeah.
Hey, guys. I'm glad it's working for you with the networking there.
Yeah, it's running off this little device. The world is strange now. But talking of strange, day before yesterday, we went to a mall where Edgar got to control a robot dog. You know, the ones you see in the videos with kind of like the reverse legs that go kind of backwards? Those ones in real life,
Mhm.
he was driving it. It was absolutely crazy. And the
Wow.
guy, it was just like in a normal shop too. They cost something like, I think it was £300. It wasn't ridiculous. And he was talking about how they've been selling so many to the army because they put machine guns on them. Like, okay, that might not be the greatest thing in the world, but whatever. Whatever. Yeah, thank you all for being early today. Much appreciated. Are you fully awake, Brandel? Are you a morning person? I don't even know that. No? Okay, that's fair enough. Right. So,
I wasn't a
yeah,
morning person and I was very anxious. I was excited to get to London because then I thought the meetings will be in the afternoon and how much better for me. I don't have to get up for it at 8 a.m. And now I'm having the opposite problem where my day has started and I've got things scheduled and it's hard to make the afternoon sessions.
the globalized economy, right? It's not always easy. Um, right.
Fine.
So,
Sorry, the doorbell rang just as he was starting to.
oh, okay, good. Yeah, Jonathan was a bit early, so I texted him. So, um, talking primarily to Brandel, but all of you, I have put together a little document for Mike, just first name, so I don't have too much on the record. You know whom I mean, obviously, right, Brandel? Right. Where I've had a really interesting time going through some of the cognitive sides of what we're doing. And Claude has really helped because it's not just being psychopathic saying this is great. It's questioned a lot of things and said it's wrong and done the right research. So it's all about, at this point, starting out with the notion that we have two visual senses, one that's quick and one that's a bit slower. So I started looking into that for entirely different reasons. But in terms of the work we're doing, it's really, really fascinating because it turns out that we judge a page before we read a word of it, which is kind of obvious. But if the typographic style, if the layout, if there's anything unfamiliar, we see it as a threat. That's the first part of the brain that deals with it. So we just don't like it. So that really, really highlights our problem of combining novelty to do new stuff for users with not freaking them out. So, the science behind that, it's the beginning of what I looked into was how police have been shown to have a very quick negative reaction depending on the ethnicities of the suspect and themselves. And then a short while after, their consciousness comes in and they're a little bit more reasoned. That's the research that started, and it goes into basically everything visual that we deal with. That was really, really fascinating. Beyond that, because I'm trying to justify the research we're doing to the big fruit company, dealing with the difference between framed and node-based interfaces is really interesting. And I had some really good chats with Claude this morning on the optimal screen size for reading, not for working. And the conclusion we came to is, first of all, free-flowing text is better, studies show. Um, Rigid layouts have their own uses for specific things, but in terms of sizing, if you go above 27 inches, it's not a good reading space. It's too much. A 27-inch display. If you are doing reflowing, then a laptop seems to be right. So all of these things make sense, and we've known about it before. But because I'm going through the process, what came out this morning was, because I put on the headset, when you have a traditional framed display, it's high quality and you know where it is. It's in front of you and it doesn't move. That's a great benefit when you're doing normal writing. You don't want something faffing about in your space, right? But with the Vision Pro, you have that. You can have a virtual monitor, as you all know, and it's almost as good as a natural thing. So that's what I'm hoping maybe we talk about a little bit today. How can we combine the two? Well, I'll summarize it in 10 seconds for Peter. The last bit. Let's see. Oh, there you are, Peter. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Thank you for joining early. I just went through a bit of an introduction, but kind of the summary is the difference between working on a framed system like a laptop or a desktop and working in VR nodal space. It's an interesting design challenge to combine the best of the two. So one thing that I really looked into today, and I really hope we can discuss it a little bit, is the idea of putting on the headset and being able to summon any of the nodes to be in front of you to behave as though it's a traditional frame display. It seemed like an obvious thing to do, not just open it and look at it, but if you can move things around, but if there's a special one, you do a gesture or command or whatever, and then you have a really large workspace for that. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
That makes a lot of sense.
So Stanislas Dehaene, the guy who wrote a book, the French neuroscientist, wrote the book Reading in the Brain. He says, and he by no means going to be the only one, says that there are a lot of sort of qualities. You still hear me? Good, I think so. There are a lot of qualities to reading that are sort of prescribed by the foveal region, just how big your actual fovea in the eye is, and then the range of horizontal angular motion that is available within the eye. And so they end up to where you would roughly expect, but you can derive them physically from those things. And so he says that there are some invariances in terms of how big a character can be in terms of its degree of arc and the consequent impact on reading size. So we're more or less invariant in terms of how fast we can read. And then it sets some reasonable bounds for how large a window or some kind of region of text is for being able to do backtracking and other things like that. So there are some relatively clear optima for reading, and I think that's sort of to your point about a window and sort of not a primary and secondary visual sense. So that's not what people call them, but this notion that we that we perceive as well as see things. All you need to do is, if you've ever sort of flipped a switch on and then immediately off in order to navigate a room, you'll know that you have a much longer memory that actually seems to go with you as you sort of navigate within there. So there are ways that you can kind of conceive of a space, but yeah, there are relatively well formed constants for what things are. The one thing that I would say is when you said 27 inches, is that they're all angular. And so it's 27 inches at arm's length. But other than that, it's pretty much what not just Dehaene's, but everybody's research sort of indicates.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I put the draft of the paper up there because the appendix has the maths behind exactly what you're saying, which was kind of interesting. Yet it is absolutely angular. The language used because of reading is exactly that, arm's length, to fully define it. Now, this thing that is written here makes the point that it's long been projected that text will disappear, and then lo and behold, AI makes us all read and write much more. And of course, having AI read for us and AI write for us. So, and the discussion in this particular work is about text for thinking, which was why the whole moving stuff about becomes more important. But I still think it's not enough to have little, like you asked very politely, Brandel, last week, is this actually useful? You said it in much nicer terms, and I answered, I just don't know yet. So that's why it's interesting now. Today they finished another build of Author Mac. Tomorrow, hopefully, or Wednesday, Vision with some of these refinements, because without the refinements, it's all very theoretical. But every time I put on the headset, which is of course every day, I am surprised at the rendered stuff in the headset. The quality of it is absolutely amazing. It is better than it's better than I would say any display other than Retina displays. It's like what we all used to work with a few years ago. It's better than that, right? So how can we have normal displays and spatial? There's got to be many thoughts on this. Combining the best of all worlds, right? Please interrupt me while I say, yeah, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, if the headset was about half its current weight and had maybe twice its current battery life, I'd forget about the traditional physical display entirely and just want to have that connected to the laptop. In fact, at that point, you could probably mount the laptop in an arm gauntlet like Predator, and from that point on, just, slip the goggles up over your eyes when you're out on the road or whatever. With the AR and pass through, you'd be able to walk around adequately at that point. And, I don't think you'd ever want to go back to a regular traditional flat display since you could have so much more screen real estate.
Yes, absolutely. I agree very much with that. Not 100%, but 99%. But to really have the benefit of that set, spatial knowledge comes into it. There is a really big difference between sitting down and partly sitting down and then moving about. Peter.
Yeah, the thing about the screen real estate is important. You may have a virtual field, like you can wander around a gymnasium-sized space, but you still have that reading thing, that 27 inches, the arm's length thing. That this is the thing I'm paying attention to now at the moment, that you can actually read. So when you have these big graphs with lots of nodes, you're not reading all that. You're getting a feeling for the ones that are out there, but and maybe you can kind of glance over, and if the font's big enough or kerned well enough, you can kind of see it off in the distance and know what that says, maybe from the shape of it. We don't really read the words, we kind of read shapes after a while. So I think there's a lot of the saying you got these node user interfaces versus the kind of flat. I still think you have a lot of little flat things that you're reading, whether they're, the way you've done it with the little white tags floating in space or whatever it is. I know I've been messing with, anytime you gaze at something, you turn it into like a white page with black text background. So you can actually read it and focus in on it. But everything else remains kind of words disembodied in space because you don't want them distracting you. So there's a lot of ways, I think, of making this, there's still this pagey thing that exists in our, the way we read things, the way we compose things. And I don't think we're getting away with that, particularly for text. When we're talking about reading and writing text, you're going to have the virtual papyruses floating around the space, I think, no matter what. And making those usable and positionable amongst other things is more like building a wiki, where you have relationship between pages and you have hyperlinks between things. You're building a knowledge map, or generating a knowledge map like you're doing with Author. But how you navigate that with headset or not headset. I mean, right now we got to deal with non-headset kind of things and pseudo 3D with mouse and cursor. I think that you're getting to the point where with Author, you can say, how do I author? How do I view these little pages of things? They're not just faces on a cube or a virtual whiteboard in like a Second Life conference room. You can do a bit more than that. But you still have little bitty rectangles, I think, are still going to be there, or little bitty pieces of papyrus floating around.
The connecting, Peter, I think, is absolutely the exciting challenge. and it's something that I think we need to really take ownership of, because while going through the process of writing this stuff, I realized that if you are on a 27-inch or bigger monitor, you are working with nodes, because each document is basically a node, right? That you move about. But on a normal desktop computer, you can't easily link between documents. So when it comes to an XR to do exactly what you're talking about, I think that's going to be the interesting challenge. We've got a lot of stuff. How do we make sure it's where we want it to be, and how do we figure out to connect it? So yeah, very cool. Tess.
I guess what would make the discussion like more focused for me in terms of answering your question is just what problem are we trying to solve, or what experience are we trying to make better? And that's sort of like where, like, what's the everyday, what's the current application that we're replacing? I know we're not trying to recreate a reading experience. We're not trying to say this is, you're going to sit down with a book, and instead of a book or a Kindle, you're going to sit down in this environment. So then literally what are we doing? Is it like, instead of making piles on your desk, we're doing virtual piles in space? Like what is, I guess I'm just trying to figure out like what the primary activity for people is, so that we can critique, what we're doing in it.
I'm so glad you're back.
No, clearly I'm terrible.
We absolutely need these grounding questions. It is very, very easy to get excited and to go into different aspects of this. Please, anyone interrupt me on this also, because it's going to be a bit waffly. At the top level, we are trying to help make it more powerful to use text for thought. Text for thought can be, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, pen and paper or pen on a napkin. It can be, like I've done with this PDF, writing to someone else, but I'm figuring it out as I go along. So text for thought doesn't have to be a mess. It can have an end goal in sight, but that's not the real point. The point is to write to understand. It's also, it can have, we looked at many issues of academia, how you go through academic papers and all of that stuff. That's as far as I want to go on this. I would really like to think what you guys think. If such a system would work, what would it actually help you with? Not some other weird user, you.
I mean, I'll just say that I don't do papers for academia, but I obviously do a lot of writing. And to your point, I do a lot of writing to help me process issues big and small, whether it pertains to my life or something else, something I'm writing or something on a global level. So I do like the idea of having thoughts I can order. I like the idea of being able to, quite honestly, have a visual representation of my problems. If I'm going, okay, what's my whether it's a problem being a to-do list for the week, or just like kind of trying to figure out like what's going on in my life in the next 6 months that I have to kind of figure out and prioritize. I like the idea of being able to place it in different places, and that feels very cathartic and beneficial to me, to kind of give it a visual hierarchy, to group things together, to break something down into steps. I don't know if that's worth $3,000 for us, or if I could just, but I do think I would love to see the studies on it, whether or not it makes you feel better at the end of whether it's the same reaction that I would have just drawing it on a piece of paper and, that way.
So, first of all, this really goes to what Peter Demetrius was talking about earlier, because when you are writing to think, you want to be able to have your other information available, right? So then, for instance, anything you've written before, if you're an academic, or Tess, any stories you might have written before, or if you're writing a subsection of a story, all the characters, something like that. So I really think the notion of context versus content is really, really crucial for this. So that comes into a little bit. And this is where the main ready bit or writey bit in front of you, I agree with Peter, will probably be a bit of papyrus. It'll be 5,000 years old equivalent. Fine. What about the rest of the space? Right? This is where it gets really exciting and really difficult. And one of the points, Brandel, that I'll be requesting from your colleagues is the ability for software such as mine to be able to open files without using the open dialog. This can be done in AuthorMac. I can link to a file. It's phenomenally useful. In my journal, I refer to this, that, and the other. I click on it, it opens whatever file it is. Very simple. Cannot currently be done in Vision. So that means that you could have a to-do list that links to all your other stuff. Right? That could be really useful to jump through your knowledge space like that. And if we can work out better, well, I don't want to use the term, but I have two formats for this knowledge. Whatever you've published before should be instantly accessible to you, but not as a frozen PDF or a relatively dumb Word document, but in a contextualized way. So every time you have to explain something, you know where you've explained it before. It's a perennial problem. The spatiality may help a little bit.
Well, I mean, I want to see it with an AI component, I think, where I'm writing, for example, I'm writing a story and I say, hey, have I used this name before? Let me, where and when, or when was the first, what has this character done in previous books? And then you want that, not just you don't want to just do a control F, you want to have some context there. Yeah.
That's absolutely something part of this. Like the conversations I've had with Claude recently have been absolutely ridiculous. I'm sure you've all had similar experiences with similar AIs, but you can exactly ask it questions like that. By the way, we now have an official podcast of this. In addition to the video record of what we have now going on YouTube, we also have an Apple podcast and a YouTube podcast of the musical version. I do hope you will hear yourself. You are generally mentioned. Sorry, I just remember that there for some reason. But that also goes into the whole use of AI, but it shouldn't be AI in a sense as a keyhole, right? You ask a thing, it's like a thread through a keyhole, and there's a vast knowledge on the other side of the keyhole. You pull through what you ask for. And often it'll suggest things you didn't ask for, but you don't have access to the structure. So the notion to include AI is you're writing about this character, for instance. You select that through speaking, pointing, pinching, whatever it might be. Whether you speak or gesture or whatever, you should be able to have any of these views you want. I'm just a bit wary of design-wise thinking about it in AI terms, right? I think we need to think of it more in result terms, like where did I first mention this character? You should be able to see the structure of where it is, not just as though you did a fancy Command F, as you said. So, right. Peter, I'm seeing your comment here, authored and generated links. Yeah. Absolutely.
I've been going into that with Mike Caulfield and the stuff I mentioned about SIFT. I put a link to one of my wiki pages. I'm just trying to collect some of the thoughts that have been going around a while. I mean, this is not new stuff. The links there are like librarians and how you make sense of things. It's sense making when there's so much faux stuff, so much slop out there. So I think there's a lot of good work they're doing in terms of how do you get people to do this stuff so that we're not overwhelmed. And how we can use VR to do that, I think, is one use case that I think would be useful. You cannot do as well today with multiple panes and browsers and tabs and things. So I think that's one new, unique thing, not just recreating, whiteboards in 3D space like Second Life.
Oh, absolutely. Peter, you used the term sense making, a term that I really didn't like. So I had to look it up. And the history of it is interesting because it means to evoke a process rather than a results. So there's a section in the PDF on sense making. And of course, it is sense making based on using our senses. So it is exactly what you said, Peter. It is moving through the knowledge with our senses to help make sense of it, right?
The tactile. We're getting to we don't quite have tactile unless you have the right kind of gloves and all that kind of stuff. But it's the equivalent of that. You want to feel the things.
I think we do have
Visual.
it tactile. I think that when you touch a virtual piece of paper, you do feel it, but you feel it through feeling your own hand. I think that is something.
Yeah, there was another one. I briefly mentioned it. Someone worked on the fact that if you do the spatial stuff, when you click on it, you think you're actually touching things. There's a audio visual thing that happens that someone's figured out. I'm not sure it's patented or it's going to be, if it's out there in the public or whatever it is, but someone's figured out some neat ways of triggering tactile responses through cueing visual and audio stuff together, which is
That's interesting.
Psychologically, I mean, the default thing that happens with the Vision Pro, where the butterfly comes out of the wall, you feel it land on your hand. I mean, it doesn't really land on your hand, but your brain feels something.
So
that has scared the hell out of my niece because she's scared of anything with little bitty legs like that scares the heck out of her.
I had a very visceral reaction. You know, the little cute dinosaur comes out in the beginning, and that's really fun and everything. But then when you could hear the big one coming and it got closer and closer, I knew I had to look away. Like I knew I didn't want to see what was coming. It's just a very, again, visceral reaction. But I get that kind of, I can't look at the picture of the construction workers on the I-beam without getting kind of dizzy and nauseous. So
the immediately relevant part of that is in the knowledge environment, if you have connective lines, they are really annoying. Unless they're exactly in a very comfortable place, they are like washing line wires in your face, I feel. You know, so it is, they're not there, but they move like this.
On a very practical thing, what I was going to suggest about the interface is that you set your own specs in terms of because when last time I was at your house working with this, you know, some of the things are ending up way behind. I had no control over where things were ending up, and some things were ending up way behind me, and I couldn't get them back or way in the distance. And so it would seem like just what's your personal boundaries for how far you want some of this stuff to go out and around the room.
That's also related to context, because some things, I'm just trying to see if there's a build for Brandl here. Sorry, it's not loading. Currently, the system that I'm developing has no knowledge of your room. So it can go through a wall, but then, you know, you look at it in the distance and you pinch and it comes back quite well. The dynamics of that are quite good. I do think it would be very, very useful and important to be able to take one of these things and slap it on the wall, which technically, of course, is possible. It's just we haven't done it yet. So, you know, those are very important aspect of it. Brandl, do you have have you tried this build? Because it's now available, you know. It would be really interesting. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Thank you for
Got out of
being
class,
early.
sorry.
No, not at all. I'm very grateful you are here. Very good. We were talking about treating nodes in space sometimes like they are displays to simplify everything. So when you're really interested in a node, it should be as useful, big, and clear and informationally rich as though you're sitting in front of a good-sized monitor, and then go to small.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that that Peter raised about authored and generated links is an important thing, in that one, like, all text is at some level sort of hypertextual, if not, like, is referential, if not hypertextual. And so that, generally speaking, there is something outside the text which is often just another text, but that whenever something is referencing something else, then having the ability to evoke it and invoke it is going to be useful. And then the second part is that whenever that thing is not just a text, if it's a date or if it's a place, then there are geospatial kind of coordinates, there are trend lines, there are all kinds of things that can be brought forth that allow one to contextualize those things. As to the test flight thing, I do think I'm actually not allowed to do that.
No,
My
no. Full
apologies.
builds are already. It's fully released. We're doing an update.
Oh, it's released?
Fully released, yes.
Okay. Yeah, maybe maybe I can take a look at that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. You should probably wait a day because we are the Mac side of things is where you generate the nodes easily, and then it transfers. But yeah, the Vision one, it's fine. There will be another version Wednesday or Thursday. But yeah, in terms of the last thing you said there, though, specifically, even though I'm of course coming at this from a textual perspective, there is no reason it should always stay text. Like you said, if there is a date or lots of other things, I'm not that keen of having like 3D objects in space. I think that can be very gimmicky. Of course, if they're useful, they should be there. But we should be able to visualize based on different aspects, absolutely, spatially. I mean, the Apple Image Playground is a great example of making cartoonish versions of heads. Most of you have already done for my address book. It's better than a bad picture, right? So there's no reason you can't do that for the authors or other people or whatever it is. And, like when we go through a bookshelf, we often don't look for the words, we look for the shape of the book, right? So all very happy with that. Yes, that was Edgar jumping in the background. I see a couple of eyes looking. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, real quick. Actually, I've been sort of wrestling with that dichotomy earlier or this week. I mean, with my little bibliography project. You're right. When you look at a bookshelf, you're looking for. I remember this is the color of the book. This is the font or something like that. That attracts your attention so you can find it. At the same time, the digital world wants the opposite. It wants consistency, and this was turned out to be the real challenge when I was trying to digitize my library by simply taking photographs of the bookshelf. That I needed to get everything into a format that the AI could parse, that the Knowledge Navigator could parse, that theoretically the Vision Pro could parse. And in order to do that, I had to make them all the same. So I had to come up with categories and break that all down. So this is a fundamental disconnect between what computers want versus what humans want. We want novelty. We want to see things that are different. Computers have an overwhelming need to be ones and zeros, ultimately. And so when you really drill down on that, just getting it, that translation is really the tricky thing. So that's the thing we kind of have to wrestle with a little bit, is what side of that line do we want the display to go? How do we translate those back and forth?
On that point, we were in an obviously Chinese bookshop today. Just look at that book. So beautiful, the cover. The side of it actually had some text, which I didn't get a great picture of, but you can kind of see it.
What was that? Understanding British Nature? Was that the tie?
No, nobody could do that. Hang on. Understanding.
I've tried to read the title in English.
Human nature.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely a problem there. And, I'm sure we all have the same feeling. Go to a beautiful bookshop, see all these beautiful books, and then what do we get for our work? PDFs that are the damn same, right? It's not exactly useful. Thankfully, now we have more processing power and more LLMs to deal with things, and hopefully we can go in a more visual way. I mean, Brandel, you've done a lot of work on making that kind of text unique, and it's really, really exciting. I mean, you even have a book cover maker for XR.
Yeah, I mean that's the goal, is to make people recognize that text is more than what's kind of conveyed through Kindle, and that there are significant benefits. I mean, there's a number of research papers coming out saying things like the physical page flipping and the relative mass of the items and things like that. On the one side of the spine versus the other, um, are useful cues. And I really take that not as an indicator that those things are like, on one hand, those are serious. Those are really important sort of components that we've sort of incidentally discovered by way of creating paper books in the form that they exist today. But and we kind of ignore them at our peril. But at the same time, I don't think that those are anchors that mean that we always have to have these hypertextual, uh, unreferenceable things that need to be distributed on the backs of trucks. The distribution and the cost of update and the capacity to correct or reference are really really deal breakers. And so, if we can come up with reading that performs these functions a little better, then yeah, I think it would be really nice. I've been reading. I don't know if people have read Ministry for the Future. Really, really fun, light read through this kind of midwinter heat wave. But it's, again, sort of broken up into so many different pieces, sort of aesthetically and functionally, that I feel like having the ability to, even do something as simple as be set in different typefaces, would have been maybe a challenge for the publisher, and interesting and useful for the purpose of the book. I actually don't have the paper book, um, and maybe there are slightly more kind of innovations there, but it's interesting to realize the ways in which those sort of contrasts might be able to come about. I mean, I have a question for people who do writing. Um, with Microsoft Word and other applications style like that, are you able to change the page color? Has anybody ever done anything like change the color of the page to mean different things? I know the type can be changed, but the pages. Has anybody ever done that before?
I don't think you can do that with
Not
Word.
individually.
Yeah.
Right.
You'll be able to get
You- I-
into a reader concentration mode in a whole bunch of different apps where you can decide whether you want a sepia background or whether you want a straight white or a dark mode. But you don't really have the ability to say, okay, this page is going to have a red background. Now, page 7 is going to switch to a blue background to indicate that it has technical material on it. Now we're going to some historical material, so we'll switch that page background to
Mm.
light tan. It'd be nice if we
I
had that
think
functionality, but
I think the closest you can come in Word is highlight color. If you just highlighted the whole page in a different color. Doesn't Pages do that? I've
I
never
don't see
tried
it.
it. No?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Pages
funny
has a lot
because
more graphic.
I like, my first thought is I don't know why you would, just in a pragmatic standpoint. But what's interesting is in scripts, there in film and TV, there's famously a system, or there was a system of colored pages to indicate what draft they were in and what changes they were on as things were coming in. And Final Draft actually does have settings, and probably other script writing programs too, where if you're working in Final Draft, you can select. I don't know if it visually changes the color, if there's just some other. I've never worked with it, so, but they have things like you're in goldenrod, you're in, whatever the color was, because they did go through it.
yeah, in my own office, I have a ream of blue paper, and when I have the final published draft of something, I'll always print it out on the blue paper so that I can tell that instantly just by the color of the printout, which printout was the final printout versus all of the intermediate draft printouts.
That's interesting, Peter. One place where you can do that, and you all do that, is, normally the pages are like this, but when they're horizontal, we're in Keynote, and we do change the background, which is very, very interesting that that's a different functionality.
Also, another
Now,
bit of functionality we should touch on is how some books will have the thumb tab indexes printed right at the edge of the page, so that when you're looking at the book, edge on opposite the spine, you can see all the little marks slowly descending through the book to help you jump directly to specific chapters. So that's a real nice tangible affordance
Yeah, like
that some books have.
page bookmarks, like in a physical one that stick out, similar to that. Yes. Another related thing to this is the question of why you would want to have that, and also when you would want to have that. Yeah, one of the things that I've looked at experimenting with is scrolling and reading are two very, very different things. When you start scrolling, you're saying to the system, I don't want to be here, I want to be somewhere else. So why does it show you the information in the same way? This could be an example where it could automatically color different paragraphs based on criteria, maybe manually set criteria that you don't have to look at when you're not scrolling, because then you know where you are. Similarly, coloring keywords in the text could turn on only on scrolling, so you can go through the text and get an idea. And finally, there's the notion that any brand names and people, when you're scrolling, the text changes to icons, logos and things like that. So the text itself, which you can hardly ever read when you're scrolling anyway, becomes smaller and irrelevant, but all the pertinent things that can be visual suddenly are icons. So reading, scrolling, skimming, navigating, jumping, editing are all very, very different in terms of the affordances we should be able to give ourselves, right? Now, just for fun, to go back to the question of text for thought, how could text help us think like this when we do things like colored backgrounds? How could that help us? It could be like the draft thing, couldn't it?
Ideally, you don't want black on black.
Well, maybe, like that book cover has some black on black, but it's for a very specific effect, right? And in Final Cut, you have this notion of auditions, where you can have the same bit of video, you can toggle through which cut is better. Right? Maybe you can have different colors for different sections of a book or a document or a thought or something. Color coded with red, meaning I'm not sure about this. Green, I'm done. Or blue has this is final.
Well, color can all be organizational, right? Colors is a tool you can use to organize and order things with. So if it's everything that has to be done on Monday of this week is purple, everything that can wait till next week is red, and that's as an example. So it can help you visualize things, because I think that one of the things, and it's funny because I remember, Tom, I think it was your piece in November, your speech was about trying to move away from this like this real world signifying thing, like no more folders, like no more having the one for one, the virtual version of the real world version. But I think objects are really useful. I think it's why GUI was so brilliant, because one thing I think about in the digital age is how impermanent our art is, since it became invisible, since we stopped, since so many people stopped buying and owning books or DVDs or CDs, and all became digital. And there's a sense of impermanence to it, because we're not being confronted with the physical object every day, where I forget the books I read. I forget the albums. I buy more albums and more books than I ever did, or download them, and I can't remember which ones I've even read or listened to from time to time. And so I do think that anything we can do to give text more permanence, visually speaking, is helpful. And I think assigning colors, assigning shapes, anything like that is helpful.
It is, of course. Then the second, sorry, Tom, I was just briefly going to say, will that be permanent, or will it be temporary? If it's how do you want it to be, like a book on the wall? Sorry, Tom, please go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we're kind of making a McLuhan-esque mistake here a little bit, because we're referring to a book, and the book is the medium, and by multicoloring the pages, why are we doing that? We're doing that in order to signal something about the ideas on that page. that are separate from the book as a whole. I mean, they're not separate, but they're only a portion of the book as a whole. We're once again talking about deconstructing the book, though. By changing the color of the pages, you're deconstructing the book, right? So at that point, you might as well have multicolored Post-it notes with just the ideas on them, which is why I think that we need to, again, I will reemphasize my point that we need to be thinking beyond physical media when we're doing the virtual text and think about the book as a physical media for containing ideas. And it's effective and it's served us well. I love books. I read them too. But I'm just saying that it is constrained by the fact that you've got pages and covers and you can only go so far, and look at and so when we explode that, we shouldn't be handcuffed by the medium. And I think the color aspect, the color question really should apply to ideas and separate from the book, and therefore the being able to color the pages is largely irrelevant, is what I'm basically arguing here.
I think
But well, I mean, it could be ideas, but we all think differently. Like I might need to, not only do we need to organize these, things of data into different, everyone's going to need to organize it to their own specifications, but the ideas that jump out at you are going to be different from the ideas that jump out at me. So it's all really highly.
Your color can be purple and mine can be green. I mean,
they could be the same color and you could call it green and I could call it purple. We don't know.
Well, that's true. What color is the sky?
Yeah.
But if you're colorblind, you're really in trouble. Sorry, Frodo.
I think the current issue of New Scientist tackles exactly that question. Is your red the same as my red? I think you're both onto the whole point here. Today we aren't really talking about authoring and reading as such, but in general, an author, editor, designer should be able to do specification for how a book, and I think we do mean book in the really wide sense, like a document. A book could be a three-dimensional structure in XR, absolutely. But of course, when we're doing thinking, we should have very clear ways to differentiate our different ideas. And I think that is part of the key challenge we're dealing with.
Thinking about whether I want a page to be green or not, and the wanting it permanently or not question. I think the very most basic idea of view specs is one that is something that is not only important but actually almost entirely unanswered. So the flexibility of having multiple configurable views, I don't think I know really any text-centric application that has the ability for me to construct views over a piece of text very well at all. Ones that have the ability to kind of assemble or transpose things. Most of them are making a single canonical view of it. And you can do things like say, because this is a heading, it's going to be filled into an outline, and that's good, but it can't be green in one view and blue in another. It can't be highlighted in one kind of representation, and for those to be stripped out in another. The work of alternating between one view to the next is simply not really supplied. And I think that that's really interesting in terms of whether the people have completely shied away from it, or whether it's because once somebody starts, then other people will continue.
That link, by the way, that I shared won't work. That's the edit view. I'll update you in a minute. So let me show you this. This is on your point, Randall. So what we try to do, what I try to do with author is meaning semantic markup or design, not arbitrary. You can do that in Illustrator and other page layout programs and things. So as I think most of you know, you can highlight specific stuff in a different way, where the design is it's supposed to help you skim your own text to see what each paragraph really says. All the other stuff is context for the reader, right? Key with that is when you export, you can hide it. So it becomes normal text, or you can keep it, or it can be something you remove. But in terms of your layouts, Brandel, when you go to the outline, that text is included. So you can read your whole document. It's not as visual as you're talking about. And if you mouse over, it focuses on where your cursor is to help you read that stuff. And if you click on keywords, they can be, this is a very short document. You can see I have certain color coding, like products are pink. The big people in our field are green and so on, right? And of course, you have a separate view for the links out, the citations. So I know that's not fully what you're saying, but this is my way of showing that I agree with you, that it's something to pursue and to give users more and more control. But of course, you get also to a point where the user has so much control that they don't know what to do. And most people don't care. So you got to have the balance of making sure they feel the layout decisions they have to make is expressive for them rather than a chore for them. Not that you would disagree with that, but that's just the design from the side.
Yeah, having smart defaults is a good start, but having people also recognize that simply because something is organized away is only that's contingent. So it's durable, it's recoverable, but it's also something where people don't have to commit to one way versus another. On some of this kind of materiality stuff, I think I've mentioned before that I've been trying to teach my daughter through some fairly difficult bits and bursts a little bit of programming. And she's just gotten to recognizing the critical sort of difference between K&R versus Allman bracing, which is where if you put the open brace for a function on the same line as the function declaration or the line after, and she's in Camp Allman for the time being, and I find that very funny that because I wasn't teaching her that, and she was like, but why don't you do it like this? And it's one of those things that underpins a lot of not just house styles, but actually language defaults. And so there are a number of languages that will put the brace line after, and they're really subtle. It's a very, very small change that has a big impact for the sort of the cultural foundations of what people do with their actual source code. So it's really interesting to realize that people will sort of park so many different values into such a small and absolutely minute distinction, and I think sort of indicative of the way in which people make those differences meaningful, even outside of a context in which most people would even realize they're happening. So yeah, I do think that like giving people freedom, and even if when those freedoms are subtle, maybe especially when those freedoms are subtle, it will be really interesting to see what they kind of do with them.
And that's why I developed for Mac and not Windows. Most Windows users don't even change the desktop. Yeah, that's really important, Brandel. And Jonathan wrote something very relevant that I would love to jump off. So, Jonathan, do you mind reading that, please?
You mean reading it out?
Yes, please. I think it's
I was just thinking that the one time, well, not the one time, almost the only time I've used kind of things like track changes and strike through and highlights and so on in Word at least has been between lawyers, and that is when precisely you do want those things to be shared. You don't. Well, you probably want those things to be shared. You don't want to have a view. You don't have, say, two different views, one which could show one set of strikeouts or something, and the other that could show something else. So I would imagine the commercial imperative for those rather boring but common use cases has made people shy away from having really radically different views of the same document. But I think there'd be enormous use cases for having radically different views of the same document. I mean, such that they almost look like different documents. If that's what we were discussing, I mean, we've gone on the various tangents. Yeah.
What's
That's part
interesting
of it.
as a professional web developer, sorry, Berta, I've so rare. Most of the time, you build one style sheet for an HTML file, and sometimes they're relatively different. So, like on Apple.com, we tend to have one HTML file, and then it is one style sheet, but it is sort of adaptive, so such that it sort of will work properly on a mobile size sort of class device versus a desktop class device. But for the most part, you look at one or the other based on device rather than because you're sort of contingent. But there's nothing to preclude, if you actually delete the CSS references in an Apple.com page, what you should get, ideally, for most pages, is a well-formatted piece of HTML that looks more or less like Wikipedia, such that all of the paragraphs and heading level 2s and things like that are all at the size and in the position that they should have. But there's nothing to stop somebody from writing two equally canonical CSS declarations that have the ability to style the same page in two completely different ways. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to play with, is to say, like, hey, there are reasons for doing this, and this is a way that you can use styling to represent these different disparities. Sort of the different distinct kind of views to read it. So I think I might play with that. I think that's really interesting too.
There was a book quite a way back, I think it's called CSS Zen Garden, where they did that. They wrote lots of CSS styles for the same text, and it came out really different. It was quite beautiful. The downside of this relates to linking as well. And that's also in the PDF that I said. Yeah, CSS, thank you. Oops, I was a bit late there. Didn't read that. If you have a link today, a web link, it will link most likely to a download page, which you then have to click to link the PDF or the HTML, if it's within academia, right? If the knowledge is on a web page, like the Medium article that was just shared here by Brandl, for instance, if you download that, you really need to download the or a CSS style sheet. Otherwise, it just won't render right when you put it back in the browser, right? That is a really important deal, because let's say you are going through a document, and let's say for the sake of argument, it's PDF, you mark it up, you write notes, you annotate it, you really work on it, it's important. If you're then reading someone else's document and there's a link to that, it's not going to be a link to your local, it's going to be a link to something online, which doesn't have your annotations on it at all. That is one of the reasons it's so important to be able to have linked to local stuff as well, because you will have made that document your own to an extent. So we talked a long time ago about caching and local and downloading and all of these things. Those discussions were generally in terms of data and efficiency. But in terms of knowledge work, of where your knowledge lies, it becomes important yet again. And this is one of the key reasons I'm hoping that in XR, especially with the Vision, which is my current weapon of choice, there is a larger opportunity for owning stuff and connecting to your own world rather than always having to reach out to something that is not modified by you. And of course, that could be in this note taker. I keep trying to get rid of it. Let me just do it. It's from somebody who was in our group a long time ago. Jolly nice guy, but he's forgotten to disable his note taker for our meetings. Anyway, these are all importantly related issues, and it does come back to how we think with text, because even if you're thinking while reading, you're still thinking, right? Okay. But let's go a little bit further today, but not super long. If we have our own fantasy environment, and let's not worry about defining it, what it would be, what would you actually want to do in it? Where the basic notion is you have lots of things you put where you want. and lay them out as you want. And any one of these things can be expanded, open, whatever you want, to be basically a full monitor, lots of stuff happening. And these things can be connected. What would you actually use it for?
I would use it for the sort of the broaden and narrowing of sort of search across a domain. So having the ability to pile up prompts and thoughts, not prompts in the AI sense because I don't use it right now, but having things that I want to remember. So I use a notes document. I have 4,000 notes in it, and most of them are just, it's mostly a whole day's worth of sort of scratch notes, but they exist, and having the ability for those to be sort of shaded across that continuum between sometimes they're URLs, sometimes they are descriptions of a visual image, but and I can't really draw very well in notes. I can't have URLs in notes. I've only been doing it for 10 years, and I have 16,000 emails and other things like that. So there's a range of things, Jonathan, that this kind of stuff is spilled across. But yeah, the where one note might be many if they can be kind of spatially separated, where it's possible to kind of re-invoke a relative spatial arrangement of things such that I have these tabs meaning these different things. Oh wow, that is more than me. I tend to use an internal OS version of Safari, and so it never really lasts more than 20 tabs. And that's not that's just to do with the sort of the battery and power and performance. Just on the battery life, it's hard. It's very hard to get it to be as good as it is for private customers, and almost everybody working on the system does not get the same benefit for most of the year. So yeah, I think having the ability to kind of allow the nascent ideas that are represented in these notes to live in whatever form and go as far along that sort of continuum toward a more resolved intent would be a useful thing for them to have, and to have the relations between them. So if there's a sketch in Adobe Illustrator that I've done, then relating that's sort of as much sort of documents, not apps, as well, as a concept that you should be able to subordinate whatever kind of document into whatever conceptual flow you have, rather than having to say, this is an Illustrator shaped thought, this is an ASCII text shaped thought, that kind of thing.
So that's wonderful. Thank you. Peter, and then Jonathan.
Okay, I'd really like to have bibliometric visualizations. I want to be able to see the links, the citation links are organized temporally, so I can see which works came first on one side of the room, which are most recent on the other side of the room. And also, I want the system to extrapolate from that links between authors themselves. So if I'm looking at the author cloud, I want to see which authors cited which other authors without having to look at the books themselves. So that sort of like be a higher level. So I would know that Freud has been citing Brandel, or maybe a different color link if they've both been citing each other. So Brandel and Freud would have a link between them that might be bright blue to indicate that they're citing each other back and forth, as opposed to Freud citing someone who passed away 50 years before he was born, in which case the link would only be going in one direction. So the link at the people level and also at the topic level, to be able to say this topic was a source of information for other topics. So let's say a book that I cite had certain topics in it. I want there to be an implicit link between the topics that I'm talking about and that book. So basically, I want some sort of a hybrid influence view, so I can see what subset of the materials that I have are connected to any given piece of material in terms of being sources of information that potentially influenced the writing of the thing I'm looking at the moment. So sort of a transitive closure across time as to where all the roots of the ideas were. And then if we could have the intensity of the original sources linked to how many different ways they fed into the current thing I care about, that would be useful. So, one strand might only be one strand going one direction, but one strand might have influenced 16 sources, who influenced 20 sources, all of whom came back and fed into the current thing, which would make that core source way more important than a core source that only influenced one person who sort of came in on the side more recently.
That's interesting, Peter. And Jonathan, just a few seconds. This seems to be something that would not be updated very often. When somebody publishes a new book or paper that you think should be there, it should be added, which is why I think it's really important.
Right, to be purely additive.
Yeah, exactly. I think it'd be very important work. I think it would mostly be what we would call context. So you wouldn't be spending that much time with it again and again and again. Once you have a clue of that flow, you've kind of built that structure. But when you are reading something new, to see how it relates to it would probably continue adding to its value. So that's very interesting. Jonathan, then Tom, I expect you have something to say on the Knowledge Navigator regarding this if you want.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to agree with everything Brandel, Peter, and no doubt what Tom is about to say. In that, the way I see what I would like to see on the screen is possibly a generalization of what most people tend to talk about. I want to be able to read and write knowledge in the widest sense on my screen. And to start with a very simple, and obviously the way author is going is tending in this direction, but a sort of a common thing that people are used to seeing, things like mind maps. It doesn't have to be literally a mind map, but text or whatever it is, maybe in blobs or maybe not in blobs, with lines in between, and very often it's implicit what the lines mean in terms of a relationship between two objects. But to make it clearer, you can start having words on lines between objects. I'm not advocating this, by the way, but this is just the way that people tend to do things when they're scribbling ideas on paper. So you can say, the cat sat on the mat, or whatever it is, or it might be a summary of your thoughts around the article you're writing, or it might be notes that you've read. So it could be both kind of input and output. But I would like to see a big generalization of that so that you can, without using piles of prose, that there are standard graphical ways of showing mainstream knowledge in various ways, such as, we've talked about things like timelines, causation between things like, I want this, or I plan to do that, or something, without having to turn everything into a rather difficult to read diagram involving blobs and lines, which none of us really like. So you want to have a graphical way of displaying human knowledge in a graspable way, so that you can both read it and you can both write it. So it might be that you take instead of me writing notes as I currently do using Ulysses, which is one of these standard kind of markup based note-taking apps, instead I could do it in this more semantic way, which is actually, as well as having some text, is actually showing the big picture. And maybe I could write an article or do some other very different type of knowledge work by manipulating this graphically, using, moving things around or drawing things or whatever it might be. And I'm just doing a bit of a brain dump here, and necessarily as part of that is that you don't want to spend a lot of time generating layouts of information like this yourself. So obviously with Author at the moment, you can I think you can move things around and position your information in space according to some personal, you know, concepts or grouping that you may be having. I mean, that's great, but I think the vast majority of the time you would be wanting to read information and have it arranged for you, kind of by default, in a semantic way to show you whatever relationships are natural, such as time-based or importance-based or whatever it is. So this is like a generalization of the Finder, let's say, on Mac. And so, yes, this question of whether you have automated, so I'm just looking back at the chat, whether you want to have automated positioning of things and so on. I mean, I think absolutely you would want to have that. And so this would be a new, very general graphical medium for knowledge-based working, which would include text, but includes versions of things which are kind of familiar at the moment, like infographics and so on. Sorry. So I'll stop the brain dump there. But obviously some of this is obviously heavily overlaps with stuff that Tom is looking at, and lots of people have looked at that, but no one ever seems to take it that far because it's not easy.
Some of it is relatively easy. Some of it is almost intractable. You had a little almost throwaway sentence of organized by importance. Important has to be through some sort of criteria, of course. So what the XR version of the author map allows you to do is anything that is easily understandable by the system you can arrange. So if you have automatically made your notes, they will most likely have dates associated with them, if there are people and so on. You can very easily organize all the selected people by time, depth, X, Y, Z, whichever one you want. That is an example of that. To do more criteria for the layout, you need to be able to define the criteria, which can become very, very tricky. But of course, is an important problem to work on. And Tom.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I especially agree with some of the stuff that Jonathan was saying. And I just had a thought as I was listening to him. You know, when we organize information ourselves, we do it through the lens of things we've read, people who've taught us, you know, in terms of what's important, what's not. You know, I know that and I know you do too as well, Frode, look at things through the lens of what, you know, Doug Engelbart or Ted Nelson has written or talked about over the years as a way of arranging information in a manner that makes sense to you, right? One of the things that actually had a thought as Jonathan was talking, I'm going to be really evil here, but imagine for a moment you could upload all of Engelbart's stuff into an AI, which you could do, but then you could essentially create a persona that you could then use as a filter for the information and say, what would Doug think is most important from this article or this group of articles or this book? You know, what is the part that I need to really pay attention to here that other people would miss, but that Doug would see? Or this, you know, pick your poison, Einstein, Nelson, whatever, but that you could have these personas that you could upload. I'm thinking about doing this for my government class and uploading the founding fathers' writings into a notebook LM and having the students run queries against them. You know, hey, how do we fix the problems of, you know, that are going on in the United States right now? What's the solution based on your philosophical thinking from 1787? And I think that might be kind of fun. I'll keep you posted on that one.
I like that very much, and I have done that to a very limited extent, agreeing with you in direction, not in implementation. One of the key prompts in Author's Ask AI is Inspire, and I've experimented with different versions of saying, you know, look at what philosophers would have said and so on. I do think it'd be interesting to have full-on knowledge avatars in the space like that. I do think we also need to be extremely careful how we use them. for the sake of our own understanding. Yeah, that's one thing. But also, just to kind of go back towards the thinking side, the document that I shared with you guys has an appendix, and it has some endnotes. It seems like appendix and endnotes are really, really brilliant to be used in the XR knowledge space, because they're essentially saying, I got some more stuff, but I don't want it to be prominent. Right? So, for instance, you know, when you're working on your own thoughts, you write down the thing, and then you have a lot of scribble about it. You put that somewhere else, but connected. Because, yeah, I mean, like you do a little bit of a side quest. You know, you have a conclusion.
Why
like
is having
I
too
have
many? Yeah. Why is having
No.
too many footnotes annoying?
It depends on why. That's a
Well,
joke,
because
right?
it breaks the flow of the reading. I
Oh.
mean, you're sitting there and you spend half your time going through the footnotes. You're like, okay, what was what was he talking about or she talking about in the text? You
Yes,
lose that thread.
But this discussion now, because I agree with you, Tom, is not about reading. It's about thinking,
Yeah.
right? And we don't often, and that's why I think it's interesting what we come around to, that to use the notion of an endnote or an appendix, not for an end product necessarily, but for yourself.
Mhm.
So in the reminders app that I'm sure most of us use, generally we write an item, but there is an opportunity to write more small text below it, which I hardly ever use because it gets cluttered. But these hierarchies, zoomable interfaces, whatever we want to look at, becomes interesting when we look at it through these different perspectives, maybe. I mean, I'm sure some of us have had some very interesting long discussions with the AI that we'd like to put somewhere, but not really front and center. So maybe once we get something interesting, we put the conclusion bit. That's the bit we use. But wherever we put that, it knows all the stuff behind it. I mean, Brandel, the discussion at the beginning of our conversation about the different visual systems, there are different ways of looking at it. When I first talked, I mean, this version of it I learned from Behave, the brilliant book that I recommend to everyone. Andrea made me read it. And Claude misunderstood, thought I was talking about Kahneman's work, System 1, System 2. And it was actually quite good, and I said, be careful. Kahneman never said there are two distinct systems. This is an approach to how to look at it. And so I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about Behave. Oh, okay, so I went back to that. That kind of back and forth and that kind of reasoning and that kind of result is useful. But where do we put it? So this is where the notion of an XR appendix becomes interesting. But if we look at the notion of having one of our nodes becoming like a normal display with all the functionality, what are the means through which we would want to tie these together? You know, at some point, we want to make an argument. An argument has a grammar to it. I think this because of that supports it, that doesn't, you know, that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on that? So we don't just have disparate random things in space.
Well, I do think that sort of there are terms that have been taken up, unfortunately, by AI that are useful to useful to try to pull back and conceive of on their own terms. And one of them is summary. So a summary of something being a distillation for a particular communicative intent. And so in the same way that it is relatively clear when you're building a presentation for a, you know, that will live in some sense as a keynote, that you can have bullet points of it, or you can have scratch notes or something in between. Being able to kind of construct of you a summary that is a particular artifact for the purpose of conveying and communicating to other people. So that's, I think, a useful thing. And, you know, maybe implicit in that is that it's constructed by virtue of a a prompt. But those things I think are still significant outside of there being an artificial intelligence doing the summarization or an artificial intelligence being powered by a prompt, but simply thinking of those as motivating as sort of actions and artifacts. And so yeah, like I helped somebody. Hopefully this week it will come out to the public. A just a proposal for how some stuff should work, some fit stuff to. I mean, my model work is all continuing. If you see the specification as I'm adding more pieces to that. Hopefully, I should get some diagrams in there as well. But yeah, like the transposition of certain verbal descriptions or code descriptions into diagrammatic representations instead. These are all sort of views on the same thing. Yeah. So if you have an audience in mind, if you have a view of what it is that they need, what they see, then being able to construct something from something on those terms while still retaining the what of the original corpus, whatever it is, such that it sort of flows from it. I think that's interesting.
Thank you, Randall. Hi, Astral. We started quite a bit earlier today because I'm in Shanghai at the moment. I don't think I have your email address. I would be very happy to email you updates if we make changes. Also, if you like to, on our listings page, you can subscribe to the calendar, which lists the topic of the day, and if the time changes, it'll be reflected there, just as a little thing. But anyway, glad you're here. Okay, cool. I will put that in my address book. And anything else, anyone, while I do that, so I don't forget? Hang on, the system is behaving weirdly. Boom. Okay, so that's done. So you're in the main list, and we're up into the window. I can't see any of you guys. Suddenly Zoom has gone. Oh, there you are. Okay, I apologize. Your voice is out. Okay, fair enough. I know that experience. Brandel, is there anything more you would want to say on that?
I mean, I do think that there is an easy thread that relates sort of the work that we do through the time that we do it and the relations of the applications. It's a tricky one for anybody, but an operating system to kind of mediate over. But the way that we sort of attend to things being sort of a pretty significant connective tissue would be a really nice thing to be able to leverage. Something that I realized, I think, I don't know if I shared the diagrams, but back in 2007, 2008, I built a browser plugin, a browser history plugin for Firefox at the time, where you constructed the hierarchical tree view of all of your browser history, so that you knew all of the tab switches as well as which tabs opened what and things like that. One of the things that was really interesting about that is that once you have such a rich basis for being able to kind of reason about what it is you did and when, you can start to make some really interesting kind of relational summarizations of like what kind of browsing you were doing at what kind of time, or what kinds of browsing sessions you have. So if you have sort of both bimodal or multimodal distributions of when you're doing that and things like that. And so I think that there's a lot of derivation and inference that can come from establishing a proper relationship between those pieces of those artifacts. In the case of browsing, it's just browsing, but in the case of work or reading or writing, then there's more to go on. And having that capacity for abstraction and relating is something that I think could turn stuff up. And AI could help, but it's by no means a sort of a central feature of it. It's just that when you have that data, then you can kind of take interesting readings off of it.
Of course, now we're living in a world where we do part of our browsing through AI, and they do leave a trail, but it's not a trail that we necessarily have easy access to. So to have our web browsing trail, our AI dialogue trail, and something like that would be interesting as well, Brandl. Yeah. Peter.
Yeah, one thing that would be nice would be to have a timeline, be able to select a source, and then see what points on the timeline I'd been accessing the source previously. Then select one of those points of time and see all of the other sources that I'd been looking at around that time.
Yeah, that's interesting, Peter. But we weren't going to go on too long today. And I'm so grateful you changed your timing to be here. But imagine we have this nodal space, and we have things in there we would expect we could able to write down on a piece of paper or a napkin or something. And we can build up layers of contextual understanding. What kind of thinking would you like to do there? When do you think you would actually say, oh, this is too damn complicated. We're going to put on the headset and enter this, what I would call knowledge space. What would that be? Without referring to a literature review or going through books or papers, because that's a different and very clear case. I'm just saying the pen and paper to be positively provocative, because we all write in a Word document or equivalent a couple of things here and there, right? And try to remember and so on. And we all, I think, would remember Doug Engelbart's demo where he does the diagram of his drive home for what to buy in different places, which is an amazing thing. We still can't do that in most software. You can't have an image that's immediately an image map, but it does help to clarify. So any dreams or thoughts? I will throw a few things out there and interrupt me when it gets to something that's exciting for you. You are actually writing an article, so you're authoring, but you're at the early stage. You're trying to design a product or a new feature. I hate to say it because it's such a base example, but you're trying to organize a trip or movement to somewhere. You're trying to understand a new field. And then you get into the interesting notion of your internal mental map being externalized. I think Tom talked about this extensively before, so that the new stuff can better map onto what you already have. Or if you're creating a story like Tess is working on, when do you think you would feel the urge to open your mind in this sense? It's weirdly difficult question, isn't it? Considering we're all interested in building something like this.
Well, I mean, I usually, as I'm formulating the idea, the plot, so to speak, I'm looking at all of the different threads and connections to try to figure that out. But then also, as I'm writing things come up in my head as I'm drafting the text. And as I think I talked about earlier, when I was writing the piece for the symposium, it actually wasn't hugely faster to use AI because it gave me such a wider vision than I had before that it basically opened up all these rabbit holes. And my biggest problem was going, I can't I only have 4,000 words. I can't spend them on this topic, even though I may find this intensely fascinating and completely relevant to the topic. At some point, you got to cut. You got to say, okay, this is this is the path forward. And I spent a lot of time doing that. I've thought much more deeply about the topic as a consequence, but that didn't make it into the paper because there wasn't room for it.
I already work with, depending on what it is, but often, even if it's not super visual, Adobe Illustrator was maybe the first sort of professional grade tool I got good at using, probably close to 25 years ago now. And so I throw a lot of stuff into Illustrator for a lot of different reasons. I can draw diagrams in it, but you can also just use it as an artboard. More recently, in the last 5, 6 years, I have used Blender. It's interesting. It's not good to Blender always wants you to look at things from the outside for whatever sort of that means. Maybe some people have the ability to kind of live in it in the sort of closer quarters, but it sort of reduces the apparent scale thing such that you're looking at it from the scale, sort of the vantage point just beyond it. A lot of the time you have to really fight to stay in it. But it is a really interesting way of being able to arrange a large number of things. So I've storyboarded virtual reality based experiences by having a really low poly mesh of a person and then lining them up all along sort of a corridor essentially of their interactions with doing things. That's been interesting. It then becomes pretty difficult to put text in there. You know, it's not easy to put audio or to animate those things. The manner and mechanism for animating is pretty painstaking, despite what OkGo has done to Blender, thankfully, which is super worth checking out if anybody hasn't seen it. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of different sort of go-tos that imply some different things pretty strongly in terms of what it would be nice to do. The problem is that those things need to be pretty frictionless in order to make sure that one can kind of reflexively transition into them as a way of working. And what we have right now and across all of those tools is very much not that. Freeform, I guess, is trying, but I don't think it's for me.
On that note, a provocation. One of the issues with these tool for thought system and second brains and so on is getting stuff in there. I noted someone commenting on. Maybe what we should think of is this XR environment being a place where you actually write articles. That is what you do. And what I mean by that is not articles necessarily for publication, but instead of thinking it as a throwaway note or a bit of knowledge, you try to put coherence in there actively. So as you're working, you write an article on this, that, or the other. If you get too big, like Tom was talking about, the notion of here's a 30-page appendix, doesn't matter, it's digital, it's visually blown away. So we change our paradigm away from the nodes to articles. So we try to create something coherent for ourselves. Like Tom, you're a prolific blogger. Maybe this environment should be a blogging environment for you, that you can easily refer to everything else you've written, blogged or papers or whatever. Never-ending story indeed. On that note,
I do that. I use Notebook LM that way. I will dump all my blogs. I have a Notebook LM that just has all my blogs in it and anything I've written, period. And say, okay, have I done this before? Is this related to something I've done before? How can I riff off of this? Things like that. So I already do that. It's not a visual thing. It's a textual thing though. So
look, I gotta go. It's getting very late here for certain people, including myself. And next week, which would be the only other time, are we okay trying for this?
Yep.
Okay, let me just look. Okay,
yeah,
fantastic.
I'm just tied up in class until 9:15 to 9:30 ish. So my time, that is.
Yeah,
So
I'll
I'll
actually,
be half an hour late.
yeah, I'll see. I may have to email you guys because, there's a time just between China and Japan as well. I should have access to it. Anyway, very grateful for today's discussion. If you have okay, thank you for the warning, Astral. That's really good to know. And also, if you have any further thoughts for next week, that's great. Please have a look at our podcast and have a listen, just to see if you think it's ridiculous. If so, be honest. If you think it's weirdly inspirational, that'll be interesting too. I just find it twisting our words in such a way throws off different kinds of inspiration. So it's kind of fun. All right. Have a good rest of the week. We're off to the neighboring country tomorrow, so it's all a big adventure. And again, thank you very, very, very much. Bye for now.
Safe travels.
Have fun.
Thank you.
Enjoy your
Thank
trip.
you. Will do. Bye.